Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Sovereign, gazing through the viewport as stars drifted lazily by. The ship was on a routine patrol in the Outer Rim territories, far from Earth, and even farther from anything resembling excitement. For 3 long months, his crew had been sweeping shipping lanes and ensuring pirates stayed clear of the trade routes. It was tedious duty, but someone had to do it. Lieutenant Amy Carter sat at her communications console, listening to the steady hum of transmissions from merchant convoys and distant colonies. Most were mundane updates, cargo lists, weather reports, navigation data. She'd done this for 2 years and could handle it blindfolded, which was why she immediately noticed when something different came through. The signal was encrypted and originated deep in space, somewhere near Zelthani territory. Amy knew the Zelthani by reputation, peaceful, brilliant, and utterly unprepared for war. They built wonders of technology and architecture but had never raised armies. Many humans considered them too gentle for such a dangerous galaxy. Working quickly, Amy began breaking the encryption while Captain Morrison watched in silence. The Zelthani used an outdated quantum lock, complex but beatable. 20 minutes cracked the first layer, 10 more opened the rest. When the transmission finally played, every officer on the bridge fell still. A tall, blue-skinned alien appeared on screen, his large eyes weary and frightened. His smooth voice trembled as he introduced himself. Ambassador Kethar of the Zelthani Republic. What he said next chilled Morrison to the bone. The Zelthani were dying. A ruthless race known as the Krex Dominion had invaded 6 months ago, exterminating entire populations. The Krex didn't take slaves or hostages. They simply wiped out every Zelthani world, leaving only silence behind. 14 star systems were already gone. Millions were dead. Kethar explained they had begged the Galactic Council for help, but no one dared oppose the Krex. Mercenaries had fled at the first sight of the Dominion fleet. Even attempts at negotiation had failed. The Krex responded by escalating their assaults. The Zelthani defense fleet had been annihilated in a single battle lasting less than 4 hours. Now only civilian transports and scattered patrol craft stood between the Krex and total extinction. At their current pace, the last Zelthani stronghold would fall within 2 weeks. Then came the plea that silenced the room. The ambassador looked straight into the camera, straight at humanity. He said his people had studied human history. They knew of Earth's endless wars, its brutality, and the terrifying resilience of its species. In the dark corners of the galaxy, aliens whispered about humans, the children of a Deathworld. Civilized races feared them, and rightly so. Where others built shields, humans used solid metal slugs that tore through armor. Where others followed rigid tactics, humans adapted in chaos, turning unpredictability into a weapon. And now, the Zelthani were begging those very monsters for salvation. Kethar's composure cracked as he confessed his people had no one else left to turn to. The rest of the galaxy was too cowardly or too far away. Only humanity possessed the ships, the weapons, and the will to fight something as savage as the Krex Dominion. The transmission ended with detailed tactical data, Krex ship designs, weapon schematics, and star charts marking invasion routes. Commander Lisa Park, Morrison's second-in-command, reviewed the data grimly. The Krex fleet numbered over 300 warships, armed with plasma cannons and shield systems that shrugged off nearly every known alien weapon. They struck fast, hit hard, and spared no one who stood in their path. The final portion of the transmission was a direct plea that made several crew members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Ambassador Kethar spoke of human mercy, of compassion, and asked whether there was still kindness left in the hearts of Earth's warriors. He begged humanity to remember that strength carried a responsibility, that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to destroy those who preyed upon them. The transmission ended with coordinates for the last Zelthani stronghold, along with a solemn promise. Any human ship that answered their call would receive the full cooperation of what remained of the Zelthani fleet. Kethar's final words echoed through the bridge. His people would rather die fighting beside humans than live as slaves under Krex rule. Captain Morrison stared at the darkened screen long after the signal faded. The bridge was silent, the crew waiting for orders. Everyone understood this was bigger than a simple patrol decision. Choices like this shaped the destinies of entire civilizations. Lieutenant Amy Carter was the first to speak, suggesting they forward the message to Earth Command. Commander Lisa Park advised verifying its authenticity, perhaps dispatching scouts to confirm the Zelthani situation. A few others debated what humanity should do, but Morrison had already made up his mind. He had heard the terror in Ambassador Keithar's voice and seen the tactical evidence confirming the truth. A peaceful civilization was being erased, and they had turned to humanity, the so-called children of a death world, for salvation. There was only one choice a human could make. Morrison ordered the Sovereign to set a new course toward Zelthani space. He instructed Amy to transmit a priority message to Earth Command containing the entire Zelthani recording and his recommendation for immediate military intervention. The message would take 3 days to reach Luna Station, but Morrison wasn't going to wait for permission to do what was right. As the Sovereign jumped into hyperspace, bound for what might become the largest conflict in galactic history, he recorded a personal message for his wife on Earth, telling her that humanity had been called to defend innocence, and that he was proud to stand among a species the galaxy summoned when it needed true warriors. Admiral Frank Collins was sipping his morning coffee at Luna Station when the transmission from Captain Morrison arrived. It carried the highest security codes, always a sign of either great discovery or imminent disaster. Collins had served long enough to know that priority reports from deep space patrols rarely brought good news. He read Morrison's message twice before calling an emergency meeting of the Human Defense Council. Within 2 hours, the most senior military figures in human space assembled in a secure conference chamber. General Susan Hayes represented the ground forces, Admiral Betty Johnson spoke for the Home Fleet, and Dr. Kevin Johnson, Chief Military Engineer from Mars Shipyards, joined via secure link. Collins played the Zelthani transmission, studying their reactions as Ambassador Keithar's desperate appeal filled the room. Some officers looked horrified at the scale of the slaughter. Others appeared wary of entangling humanity in an alien war. A few, however, showed something else: grim excitement at the chance to test Earth's war-born might against a worthy foe. General Hayes spoke first, arguing against involvement. Humanity, she said, had spent decades building peaceful relations with alien species, and intervening now could ruin that fragile trust. Worse, helping the Zelthani might provoke the Krex to turn their wrath toward human colonies next. Admiral Johnson disagreed fiercely. She had analyzed the tactical data and concluded that the Krex Dominion posed a danger to every civilization. If they could annihilate a race as advanced as the Zelthani, what would stop them from coming for Earth once they were finished? Better to face the threat now, with allies, than wait until humanity stood alone. Dr. Kevin Johnson also supported intervention, but urged caution. Human ships, he reminded them, were designed for patrols and anti-piracy actions, not for large-scale fleet battles against a numerically superior foe. He recommended retrofitting the fleet with stronger armor and heavier weapons before committing to war. The debate raged for nearly 3 hours before Admiral Collins called for a vote. The result, 6 in favor of intervention, 3 opposed. Collins immediately authorized the mobilization of every available warship and ordered Dr. Johnson to begin emergency upgrades at Mars Shipyards. The largest human military operation since the colony wars was underway. News of the decision spread quickly through human space. At Mars Shipyards, Dr. Johnson and his engineers began working around the clock to rearm the fleet. Vessels built for exploration were now being refitted into engines of destruction. The UES Reaper was outfitted with railguns capable of launching projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. The UES Vengeance received nuclear torpedoes, banned by most civilized races for being too devastating for space warfare. The modifications embodied humanity's unique philosophy of combat, where others relied on delicate energy shields and precision beams. Humans trusted in raw kinetic fury, energy shields and plasma weapons, Humans had instead mastered the art of kinetic destruction and explosive ordnance. The logic was brutally simple. A solid chunk of metal, moving fast enough, could tear through any shield ever built, and nuclear fire was just as deadly in the void of space as it was on a planet's surface. Colonel Danny Rogers oversaw the 1st Battalion of Heron Marines during intensive combat drills at the Titan training facility. His troops practiced boarding maneuvers, close-quarters engagements, and zero-gravity combat. Rogers understood that if the fleet clashed with the Kreks, there would come moments when human soldiers would meet alien warriors face to face. He intended for his Marines to be ready for anything. Their training exercises showcased exactly why alien species feared humanity's soldiers. To outsiders, human tactics looked reckless, even suicidal, but those maneuvers were forged by millions of years of evolution on a lethal world. Humans could think clearly under pressure, adapt on instinct, and fight ferociously even when outnumbered or outgunned. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Rachel Smith led the intelligence division tasked with dissecting everything known about Kreks biology and psychology. The Kreks were a reptilian species, cold-blooded, hierarchical, and violent, resembling Earth's ancient dinosaurs both in form and temperament. They were stronger and larger than humans, but slower, less adaptable, and rigid in their methods. Smith's reports revealed that the Kreks relied heavily on intimidation and overwhelming firepower rather than tactical finesse. They had conquered countless systems through aggression and numbers, not strategy. In short, they had never faced an opponent capable of matching their brutality and surpassing their creativity in warfare. She believed that this unpredictability, the human talent for chaos, might give Earth's forces a decisive edge. As the human fleet gathered at Luna Station, the magnitude of the operation became undeniable. 37 warships converged from across human space, the largest military mobilization in Earth's history. Each vessel carried weapons that blurred the line between defense and annihilation, defying what the rest of the galaxy considered civilized warfare. 3 days after mobilization began, Captain Morrison arrived aboard the Sovereign and immediately briefed Admiral Collins on his reconnaissance near Zelthani space. The situation had deteriorated faster than anyone anticipated. The Kreks were advancing at alarming speed. Several more Zelthani worlds had already fallen during the fleet's assembly. Realizing that every delay meant more civilian deaths, Admiral Collins made the decision to deploy immediately. Waiting for reinforcements or further upgrades was no longer an option. If humanity hesitated, the Kreks might complete their genocide before the fleet could intervene. And worse, other alien powers might pressure Earth into standing down. The night before departure, Morrison recorded another message for his wife back on Earth. He spoke of the ships readying for battle, of the brave men and women who had volunteered for a mission few expected to survive. He told her that humanity had been asked to become heroes, and that he was proud to serve among those willing to risk everything to defend strangers light years away. As the human fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, engines thrummed like thunder across the black void, and for the first time in centuries, Earth's warriors marched to war not for conquest, but for salvation. Hyperspace jump, and as the stars blurred into streaks of white, Admiral Collins's voice echoed across every ship in the fleet-wide comm network. He reminded his captains that they carried not only Earth's banner, but the burden of a universal principle, that civilized beings had a duty to stand against monsters. The galaxy, he said, was watching to see whether humanity would answer the cry for help or turn away as others had. Moments later, the fleet transitioned into hyperspace, 37 ships cutting through the void in flawless formation, bearing the hopes of an entire dying civilization. Behind them, Earth waited in tense silence, uncertain whether its first great interstellar intervention would end in triumph or tragedy. When the human fleet emerged at the edge of the Vorth system, it was immediately clear they were too late to stop the slaughter. The Kreks armada filled the void like a swarm of metallic predators, their dark hulls blotting out the stars. Morrison counted over 300 enemy warships, with fresh reinforcements spilling through jump gates every few minutes. The sight turned his stomach to ice. Below, the remnants of the Zelthani defense fleet fought a hopeless last stand around their moon bases. Explosions flickered across the void, brief, desperate flashes of resistance. Morrison's tactical displays showed barely 30 Zelthani ships remaining, most crippled and running on fumes. They were sacrificing themselves to buy a few more minutes for civilian evacuation. Admiral Collins ordered the fleet to hold position and survey the situation. The data that came in painted a nightmare. Orbital bombardment platforms surrounded 3 Zelthani worlds, methodically burning cities and industrial hubs to ash. Refugee convoys scattered in every direction. But Krek's interceptors hunted them down mercilessly, like predators chasing prey. Lieutenant Amy Carter managed to establish contact with the surviving Zelthani command. The reply came from High Admiral Janthera, the last surviving flag officer of the Zelthani Republic. Her voice was weary but composed, the voice of someone who had long accepted death. She thanked the humans for coming, but warned that the battle was already lost. Still, she transmitted updated tactical data on the Kreks. Their ships were heavily armored, wielded devastating plasma cannons, and relied on energy shields that could be overloaded with concentrated kinetic fire. The Kreks favored brute strength and sheer numbers over flexibility or finesse, a weakness humanity could exploit. Morrison studied the tactical feeds and saw what Janthera already knew. The Kreks were preparing their final strike. Their heaviest ships had taken assault positions, charging their planetary bombardment weapons. Within hours, billions of Zelthani civilians would die, and one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations would vanish. Unwilling to begin a war without trying for peace, Morrison ordered an open communication channel to the Krek's flagship. The response came from Warlord Tescathera, the supreme commander of the invasion fleet, a towering reptilian creature, scarred from decades of conquest, with burning red eyes devoid of mercy. Tescathera's voice rumbled through the speakers like thunder. He dismissed humanity as another primitive race chasing a glorious death and declared that the Kreks— Morrison attempted diplomacy, offering terms, appealing to reason, but Tescathera only laughed, a deep guttural sound that vibrated through the comms. He mocked the humans as naive fools, blind to the realities of galactic power. Then, without another word, he cut the channel and gave the order that sealed his fleet's fate. Thousands of plasma torpedoes ignited from the Krek's armada in a wave of searing light, filling the void with death. In that instant, Captain Morrison understood. The Kreks would never negotiate. Violence was the only language they spoke. He drew a breath, steady and cold, and gave the order that would echo through galactic history for centuries to come. Instantly. The moment the Kreks began their suicidal ramming runs, Morrison ordered his ships to scatter and reform in a pincer maneuver. Half the fleet swung wide, flanking the Kreks from behind, while the rest cut directly through their formation, weapons blazing. Human gunners targeted engines and command centers with surgical precision, turning once-proud warships into drifting hulks. The void filled with fire and wreckage as the tide of battle shifted completely. On board the UES Reaper, Captain Bradley laughed grimly as his ship's railguns overheated from constant firing. "Let them come," he growled. "We'll show them what humanity calls endurance." Nearby, the Vengeance unleashed a coordinated strike of EMP and kinetic rounds that shattered another Krek's line. The enemy's organized assault dissolved into chaos. Warp Prime Escathera's command ship tried to regroup the surviving vessels, but human ECM scrambled their communications, leaving them blind and deaf. For the first time in centuries, a Krek's fleet began to retreat. The once unstoppable conquerors were routed by what they had dismissed as primitives. When the last Krek's cruiser detonated under a barrage of railgun fire, the battlefield fell silent except for the faint hum of damaged engines and dying stars. Admiral Collins opened a channel to all ships. His voice was steady but carried the weight of history. "Today," he said, "humanity stood between monsters and the innocent, and we did not break. They found plenty." The battlefield became a storm of fire and shattered metal as human ships tore through the Krek's lines with relentless precision. Every tactic the Dominion had ever used, flanking, ambushes, concentrated volleys, collapsed under the weight of human unpredictability. Captain Morrison coordinated from the vigilant dawn, issuing rapid, fluid orders that no machine or alien strategist could match. The Kreks were powerful, but they fought like soldiers. The humans fought like predators. Inside the Kreks command ship, Colonel Rogers and his Marines advanced deck by deck. Plasma fire lit the dark corridors as human armor-clad figures surged forward, unstoppable and unyielding. Rogers' voice cut through the chaos over comms. "Room secure. Moving to primary control." Each order came with the steady calm of a man who had trained his entire life for hell and found it familiar. When the Marines reached the bridge, the Kreks guards unleashed a storm of energy fire. The humans responded with disciplined bursts, shotguns roaring, flashbangs bursting like miniature suns. Seconds later, silence fell. Warp Prime Escathera turned as the bulkhead exploded inward, his eyes widening at the sight of the blood-smeared human officer stepping through the smoke. Rogers didn't waste words. He aimed his rifle squarely at the alien warlord. "This war's over," he said coldly. The Kreks leader lunged, but Rogers' shot struck true, ending centuries of conquest in a single pull of the trigger. Outside, the human fleet pressed its advantage. The loss of command sent the Kreks forces into disarray. Ships broke formation, some trying to flee, others firing wildly in panic. Admiral Collins ordered pursuit and cleanup operations, ensuring no survivors who might regroup. In less than an hour, the once mighty Kreks armada was nothing but wreckage drifting in the void. When the firing finally stopped, the stars over the Vorth system shone again for the first time in months. Humanity had not only saved a civilization, they had announced their arrival to the galaxy in fire and steel. And across 1,000 worlds, one message began to spread that tried to retreat. Each railgun slug, each precision nuke, was a message written in fire. Humanity did not forgive the slaughter of innocents. Morrison's ships hunted through the void like wolves, cutting down the broken remnants of the Kreks fleet one by one. No quarter was given. No signal of surrender was accepted. The humans were not fighting for conquest, they were delivering judgment. Meanwhile, Captain Tom Bradley's interceptor group emerged from the emergency hyperspace jump, battered but alive. The maneuver had torn at their ship's hulls, but they had arrived ahead of the Kreks bombardment fleet, just as Morrison had planned. The sight that greeted them was terrifying. Over 100 Kreks warships descending toward the Zelthani homeworld, plasma lances charging to fire. Bradley didn't hesitate. "All ships, attack pattern Sigma. Let's remind them what Earth's fury looks like." The first volley from the human fleet was a wall of kinetic death. Massive slugs tore through Kreks' capital ships before their shields could fully charge. The Kreks fleet broke formation in chaos as human vessels dove through the debris, striking from impossible angles. Commander Nicole Davis detonated a chain of precision nuclear warheads above the planetary atmosphere, creating a blinding web of electromagnetic interference that crippled enemy targeting systems without harming the surface below. The Kreks bombardment stalled. Their weapons faltered, guidance systems blinded. Then Bradley gave the final order. "Fire everything." The humans unleashed every weapon they had, railguns, missiles, torpedoes, turning the void into a burning storm of light. One by one, the Kreks ships died, their wreckage raining harmlessly into the upper atmosphere of the Zelthani homeworld. When the last enemy vessel was destroyed, the silence that followed was absolute. Billions of Zelthani watched the sky clear and realized they were still alive. On the bridge of the Reaper, Bradley exhaled slowly and said, "Tell Morrison, it's done." Across the system, Captain Morrison received the transmission and allowed himself a rare smile. The Kreks armada had been annihilated. The genocide stopped. For the first time in the war, the galaxy had witnessed something impossible. Monsters defeated not by fear or numbers, but by humanity's will to fight for those who could not. They hunted the fleeing Kreks ships with absolute precision, cutting down every vessel that dared linger near the Zelthani world. The last battle unfolded in the upper atmosphere, where gravity turned the sky into a deadly trap. The Kreks bombardment fleet found itself caught between the planet's surface below and the incoming human interceptors above. Warp Prime Escathera realized, too late, that his desperation had doomed his own armada. Captain Tom Bradley led the UES Reaper into the storm. Using the planet's gravity to slingshot forward, he hurled his ship straight into the enemy formation. It was the kind of maneuver no sane commander would attempt. Timing had to be perfect. A single miscalculation would mean burning up in the atmosphere. But Bradley's crew trusted him completely. The Reaper's railguns thundered at point-blank range, each slug tearing through multiple Krex ships at once. Their tightly packed formation became their death trap. Explosions chained from one vessel to another until the entire bombardment line was engulfed in a fiery cascade. Desperate and furious, Warp Prime Escathara gave his final, monstrous command. His flagship broke formation and began a death dive toward the surface, aimed directly at the largest Zelthani city, home to 50 million civilians. On the Vigilant Dawn, Captain Morrison saw it instantly. There wasn't time to stop the ship with conventional fire. Without hesitation, he transferred command to Commander Lisa Park, then sprinted for the hangar bay. He launched alone in a one-seat reconnaissance fighter, unarmored, underpowered, but fast enough to reach the falling dreadnought. As Morrison's fighter streaked through the upper atmosphere, defensive turrets locked onto him, but the tiny craft was too agile for the Krex gunners. He armed every weapon on board, knowing it wouldn't be enough, and knowing he'd go anyway. "Not today," he whispered. The missiles struck the Krex flagship's engines dead on, detonating the overloaded cores. The massive warship veered off course, tumbling out of control. Instead of striking the city, it slammed into an empty ocean, erupting in a titanic explosion that boiled the sea for miles. Rescue crews found Morrison unconscious in his escape pod, floating amid the wreckage. He had survived what every record would later call the most reckless act of heroism in galactic history. In the aftermath, the few surviving Krex ships fled the system in panic. Within hours, the Dominion's envoys were begging for peace. The terms, delivered by Admiral Collins, were absolute: total withdrawal from Zelthani space, reparations for all war crimes, and a permanent ceasefire with humanity and its allies. Violation meant extinction. Later, in a Zelthani hospital, Ambassador Cather met the wounded Morrison to thank him. Words failed the alien diplomat, but Morrison's quiet reply would echo through the ages. "You asked for mercy from warriors and received justice from humankind." He explained that on Earth, the strong were taught to protect the weak. Humanity would always come when the innocent called for help. Before departing, Commander Lisa Park broadcast a message across galactic networks, a declaration that defined humanity's place among the stars.